the early days of the American West, a unique group of individuals emerged, shattering stereotypes and defying expectations. You want to know what they're called? Who these were? The Black Cowboys. Does the name surprise you? Those of you thinking that cowboys were only whites, think again. Cowboys were skilled horsemen and cattle handlers who played a crucial role in shaping American history, and the best amongst them were blacks. Cowboys like Bill Pickett, undoubtedly amongst the most famous, whose stunts were no less than an action swashbuckling movie star, was black. One of his very exceptional performances, used for subduing a stubborn steer, involved grabbing its horns, twisting its head up, and biting its tender nose or lower lip. This exhibition never failed to evoke an earth-quaking, deafening cry from his admiring audiences. People did talk all day about pretty much nothing else other than Bill Pickett's insane cattle moves. Time was just not enough to talk about all of it. However, the remarkable performances of not only Bill Pickett, but also of other black cowboys, was historically so exceptional that it generated white envy. This all began in the 1820s, when enslaved Africans were tasked with herding cattle, laying the foundation for the term cowboy. As the years wore on, these cowboys became an integral part of the ranching industry, with estimates suggesting that 1 in 4 cowboys were black by the early 1900s. These men and women were renowned for their exceptional horsemanship and cattle handling skills, honed through years of hard work and dedication. They worked tirelessly on ranches and cattle drives, braving harsh weather conditions and treacherous terrains. Black men were among the first cowboys in the US of A. They roped, branded, and saddled up for cattle drives. Some gained fame, such as Bill Pickett, Nat Love, and a whole many others.
I eventually brought up at Dodge City, Kansas, which at that time was a typical frontier city, with a great many saloons, dance halls, and gambling houses, and very little of anything else,
wrote Love, who was born enslaved in Tennessee, in his 1907 autobiography, The Life and Adventures of Nat Love. Here, the cowboy, Nat Love, recounts stories from his life on the frontier, so cliché, they read like scenes from a John Wayne film. He describes Dodge City, Kansas, a town smattered with the romanticized institutions of the frontier, a great many saloons, dance halls, and gambling houses, and very little of anything else. He moved massive herds of cattle from one grazing area to another, drank with Billy the Kid, and participated in shootouts with native peoples, defending their land on the trails. And when not, as he put it, engaged in fighting Indians, he amused himself with activities like daredevil riding, shooting, roping, and such sports. Though Love's tales from the frontier seem typical for a 19th century cowboy, they come from a source rarely associated with the Wild West. Love was African American, born into slavery near Nashville, Tennessee. The black cowboy, Bill Pickett, credited with creating the bulldogging technique of bringing a young steer to the ground in a rodeo, was featured in a silent film, The Bulldogger, in 1921. However, as time passed, pop culture maliciously erased black cowboys from the Western milieu, creating a misleading image of the Old West as peopled by white men on horseback, riding the lonely grasslands. The library's collections help document a more accurate picture of what cowboy culture and life in the Western U.S. actually looked like in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, during the cowboy heyday. They include resource guides, newspaper archives, an American Folklife Resource Project, a 2020 concert of old black cowboy songs, books, magazines, photographs, and posters that document the role African Americans played, particularly in the 1870s, when many newly freed black people headed west.
The myth of the cowboy is only one of many myths that have shaped our view of the West in the late 19th century.
Reads the library's introduction to The American West, 1865 to 1900, Resource Timeline.
The stereotype of the heroic white cowboy is far from true, however.
It says further, one quick example, the origins of Home on the Range, the unofficial anthem of the West, are famously muddled, but it's not disputed that the first recording was by a black saloon keeper and former cowboy in San Antonio, who performed it for folklorist John Lomax in 1908. In fact, Lomax's influential publication of 1910, Cowboy Songs and Other Frontier Ballads, traced several standards to black cowboys, including Get Along Little Doggies. The Lomax family collection is housed at the library, as John and his son, Alan, worked directly with the library for more than a decade in recording and archiving American folk songs. But, as much as film stars John Wayne, Roy Rogers, and Gene Autry come to mind when cowboy is mentioned, the first actual cowboys in the Americas were Spanish vaqueros who introduced cattle to Mexico in the 1500s. Early Spanish missionaries played a major role in establishing cattle country in the West and training Native Americans as cattle herders. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 sent white settlers west of the Mississippi, driven by a sense of continentalism, later known as manifest destiny, the belief that white Americans should control a vast section of North America from coast to coast. The War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War in the 1840s were fueled by this belief, with settlers marching further west, warring with Native Americans. In these vast swaths of open terrain, where law enforcement was most often non-existent, cattle were a source of wealth. There was no adequate fencing to pen them in, however. This left cowhands to fend for themselves in open country, keep up with their cattle by horseback, and protect themselves from rustlers and bandits. Thus, the romantic legend of the cowboy was born, a quiet man, capable, tough, honest, respectful of ladies, and possessed of a poetic respect for the land and his horse. In the hugely popular Wild West shows of Buffalo Bill in the late 19th century, the cowboy novels of Zane Grey in the early 20th century, then the Western films and television shows in the mid-century, those cowboys were almost always white. However, that was only part of the picture, though. No history of cowboy culture would be complete without contextualized narratives about the role that Native Americans, African Americans, and Mexicans played. And just hold on a second. Amazing viewers, if you've gotten up to this point in this video, then it would mean that you've actually settled in and are having an interesting viewing already. Offer us your kind support by hitting that thumb button in front of you, share to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe if you are yet to. Let's get back in. Few images embody the spirit of the American West, as well as the trailblazing, sharpshooting, horseback riding cowboy of American lore. And although African American cowboys do not play a part in the popular narrative, historians estimate that 1 in 4 cowboys were black. The cowboy lifestyle originated in Texas, US of A. The city had been a cattle country since it was colonized by Spain in the 1500s. But cattle farming did not become the bountiful economic and cultural phenomenon recognized today until the late 1800s, when millions of cattle grazed in Texas. The city, which was then an increasingly significant new slave state, joined the Confederacy in 1861. Although the Civil War hardly reached Texas soil, many white Texans took up arms to fight alongside their brethren in the East. Usually, while Texas ranchers fought in the war, they depended on their slaves to maintain their land and cattle herds. In doing so, these black slaves had developed the skills of cattle tending, which includes breaking horses, pulling calves out of mud, releasing long horns caught in the brush, and so many other cattle rearing skills that rendered them invaluable to the Texas cattle industry in the post-war era. But with a combination of a lack of effective containment, barbed wire had not yet been invented, and too few cow hands, the cattle population ran wild. Ranchers returning from the war discovered that their herds were lost, even out of control. They would try rounding up the cattle and rebuilding their herds with slave labor. But eventually, the Emancipation Proclamation left them without the free workers on which they were so dependent. Desperate for help rounding up maverick cattle, ranchers were compelled to hire now free, skilled African Americans as paid cow hands. Now let's get down to the digest proper. This year was 1865, and the Civil War had just ended. In the month of June, the 19th of the aforementioned year, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce General Order No. 3, which states that all slaves in the state were finally free. This day became known as Juneteenth, Following the Emancipation, many African Americans left plantations in search of new opportunities. Some headed west, where they found work on ranches and farms, learning the skills of cowboys. These former slaves brought their expertise in horsemanship, roping, and cattle handling, honed during their time on plantations, to the open ranges of the West. And by the 1870s, black cowboys were a common sight in the American West, working alongside white cowboys and Native American tribes. Although the actual number of cowboys is still unknown, a number of estimates by historians, including Kenneth Porter, estimate that of the 35,000 or so cowboys of the era, about 6,000 to 9,000 were black. An interview of William Loren Katz, a scholar of African American history and the author of 40 books on the topic, including The Black West, had reported thus.
Right after the Civil War, being a cowboy was one of the few jobs open to men of color who wanted to not serve as elevator operators or delivery boys or other similar occupations.
And working on ranches offered these men chances to earn enough money to buy their own ranch or farm or start up their own businesses. With each passing day, more ranches were established and the beef market flourished vastly. The cowboy's job was essentially to herd cattle and transport them on long journeys where they'll be transported by rail to slaughterhouses. These men rode, roped, and handled cattle with a finesse that earned them maximum respect. They worked tirelessly on ranches and cattle drives, riding through treacherous terrain, braving scorching sun, torrential rains, and icy snow. Cowboys often lived a rugged, nomadic lifestyle, often spending months on the range. Their days began before dawn with a hearty breakfast of beans, bacon, and biscuits. They'd saddle up and ride out to check on cattle, fix fences, and navigate the vast open spaces. Everyday work was difficult and laborious for cowboys. Work days lasted about 15 hours daily, and much of that time was spent on a horse or doing other physical labor. Their homes were often humble makeshift affairs, bunkhouses, line shacks, or even tents. They would share stories, play cards, and enjoy simple pleasures like music and laughter around the campfire. Work was grueling, with long hours and little rest. Cowboys faced dust storms, thunderstorms, and scorching heat. They would drive cattle across rivers, through canyons, and over mountains, always on the lookout for predators, either humans or wild animals, and strays. For black cowboys, it wasn't paradise, but it was often better than the harsh racism east of the Mississippi. Compounded with the strenuous job of a cowboy was the burden of being a black. Most times, while crossing towns, they're usually faced with the burden of being unable to access certain amenities like sleeping in hotels, eating at certain restaurants, or staying in certain hotels. But within their crews, they sometimes found respect and a level of equality unknown to other African Americans of the era. This is what Katz, an ex-slave and a cowboy in the 1900s, said.
Cowboys had to depend on one another. They couldn't stop in the middle of some crisis like a stampede or an attack by rustlers and sort out who's black and who is white. Black people operated on a level of equality with the white cowboys.
Despite the hardships, cowboys found joy in the freedom of the range, the camaraderie of their fellow riders, and the beauty of the country's landscape. They'd often have rodeos, horse races, and impromptu dances to celebrate special occasions. In towns like Abilene, Fort Worth, and El Paso, cowboys would gather to sell cattle, buy supplies, and enjoy some revelry. They'd visit saloons, general stores, and chuck wagons, swapping tales and news. At night, under the star-filled sky, cowboys would bed down in their saddles or on the ground, lulled by the sounds of coyotes, crickets, and the distant lowing of cattle. Their lives were marked by hard work, adventure, and a deep connection to the land. Going forward, these blacks had later on began facing hostility from white cowboys who saw them as rivals or inferior. The threat of violence lurked around every corner, and many black cowboys suffered beatings, whippings, and even lynchings. These were acts born out of envy. The exceptional feats and achievements of black cowboys, their horsemanship skills, roping and riding techniques, their physical strength, and so on, got on the nerves of their white contemporaries. This is always the case. There were several instances of ill will directed at blacks for no reason. One good example of such events was in the late 1800s, when black cowboys like Nat Love, also known as Deadwood Dick, faced discrimination and envy from his white counterparts. There was also the time in 1885 when Love was competing in a rodeo in Deadwood, South Dakota. Then a group of white cowboys attempted to sabotage his performance by hiding his horse. Regardless, Love managed to find another horse and went on to win the competition. In another instance, in 1890, a black cowboy named George Monroe was denied entry to a rodeo in Cheyenne, Wyoming, for no reason other than his race. Monroe had been a skilled cowboy and roper, but was forced to watch from the sidelines as white cowboys competed. Also in Texas, in the early 1900s, a black cowboy named Jesse Stahl was beaten by a group of white men after winning a rodeo competition. Stahl's success had drawn the envy and anger of the white cowboys who saw him as a threat to their dominance. In 1911, a group of black cowboys, including Bill Pickett, were denied membership in the Rodeo Cowboys Association, RCA, a prestigious organization that governed rodeos across the West. This exclusion limited their access to top rodeos and prize money. There is yet more. In the 1920s, Murtis Deitman, a black cowboy, was forced to work as a ranch hand, despite his exceptional skills as a roper and rider. Deitman's white employer refused to promote him or pay him equal wages, citing racial prejudices. The list is endless. When barbed wire became widely used later on, it revolutionized the cattle industry by making it easier to contain and manage large herds. However, this innovation led to a significant reduction in the need for cowboys, as fences replaced the need for riders to constantly monitor and move cattle. Many cowboys found themselves laid off or out of work, leading to a difficult transition. Some coped by adapting to new roles, such as becoming ranch hands or fence builders, while others turned to different industries like law enforcement or the military. Others, however, struggled to find new employment and felt a strong sense of loss and disconnection from the cowboy way of life. The decline of the open range and the cowboy culture was a significant blow to their identity and sense of purpose. Some cowboys also turned to rodeos and competitions, showcasing their skills and entertaining crowds, while others wrote about their experiences, leaving behind a rich literary legacy. It was a challenging time for many black cowboys, but their resilience and resourcefulness helped them find new paths and ways to preserve their cultural heritage. The transition had affected more those who had very limited job opportunities and more difficulty in purchasing lands. As at the late 1800s, white-dominated rodeos began to exclude black cowboys, forcing them to create their own rodeo circuits. This led to the formation of the Negro Cowboys Rodeo Association in the early 1900s. Blacks worked collectively, forming tight-knit communities bound together by their shared experiences and struggles. This made them support each other through the hard times. With the collectiveness and cooperative ideas of the association, most had begun entertaining at rodeos and sometimes forming their own shows. The 1920s saw a surge in popularity of rodeos, with black cowboys like Bill Pickett and Nat Love becoming stars of the circuit. Their skills and showmanship helped a lot in breaking down racial barriers, paving the way for future generations of black cowboys. Bill Pickett, one of the biggest figures in cowboy history, was the originator of rodeo steer wrestling, also called bulldogging. He is an African-American cowboy born in 1870 in Travis County, Texas, to a family of former slaves. He later became one of the most famous early rodeo stars. He dropped out of school to become a ranch hand and gained an international reputation for his unique method of catching stray cows. With 4 brothers, he established Pickett Brothers Bronco Busters and Rough Riders, which advertised catching and taming wild cattle, a specialty. Modeled after his observations of how ranch dogs caught wandering cattle, Bill Pickett's technique for subduing a stubborn steer involved grabbing its horns, twisting its head up, and biting its tender nose or lower lip. By the early 1900s, he and other performers were bulldogging steers in the manner of a rodeo exhibition. The biting technique, however, soon was replaced by twisting leverage that threw the steer. The event remains a central part of virtually every rodeo venue. It was apparently effective and fun for audiences to watch. Among the first black cowhands in rodeo, Bill Pickett was a featured performer with the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch and Wild West Show for over a quarter century. He died in 1932 of injuries received from a rogue horse. In 1972, 40 years after his death, Pickett became the first black honoree in the National Rodeo Hall of Fame, and rodeo athletes still compete in a version of his event today. And he was just the beginning of a long tradition of African-American rodeo cowboys. Love participated too in early rodeos. Born into slavery on June 14, 1854, in Davidson County, Tennessee, Love's father was a slave in the plantation, and his mother, a maid in the kitchen of that same plantation. With the help of his father, he would become a writer. Although black illiteracy was outlawed as at then, he had grown up seeking other means to take care of himself, traveling to many places in search of jobs, and along the way was lucky to be employed in Duval Ranch in Dodge City, Kansas. He was indeed a spectacle. According to his autobiography, Love fought so many cattle rustlers and endured inclement weather conditions. He trained himself to become an expert marksman and cowboy, for which he earned from his co-workers the moniker Red River Dick. After driving a herd of cattle to the railhead in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, Love entered a rodeo on the 4th of July in 1876, enticed by the $200 prize money. He had won the rope, the throw, the tie, the bridle, saddle, and bronco riding contest that very day. In 1876, he earned the nickname Deadwood Dick after entering a roping competition near Deadwood, South Dakota, following a cattle delivery. 6 of the contestants, including Love, were colored cowboys. Narrating his ordeal, Love said,
I roped, threw, tied, bridled, saddled, and mounted my Mustang in exactly 9 minutes from the crack of the gun. My record has never been beaten. No horse ever threw him as hard as that Mustang.
He continued,
But I never stopped sticking my spurs in him and using my quirt on his flanks until I proved his master.
Nat Love, in his autobiography, had written about the many hardships and privations they faced as cowboys, but also of the many kind friends who helped them along the way. Through their struggles, black cowboys forged a unique culture, blending African, Native American, and Mexican influences. They created their own music, art, and literature, a testament to their resilience and creativity. Today, there are so many organizations that are keeping the traditions of the black cowboys alive. Organizations like the Bill Pickett Rodeo, the Cowboys of Color, the Cowboy Artists of America, the Western Writers of America, the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, the Texas Cowboy Poetry Gathering, and museums like Ranching Heritage Association, National Heritage Center, and so many others. These organizations and museums work to preserve the history and culture of the American cowboy through exhibits, artifacts, rodeos, and educational programs. They also ensure that the cowboy culture continues to thrive. The stories of the black cowboys are a reminder that the American West was not just a land of white settlers and cowboys, but a diverse tapestry of cultures and experiences. They rode the same trails, faced the same challenges, and contributed to the same history, as noted by Elise Clark, a volunteer with the Black American West Museum and Heritage Center in Denver.
Racism took a backseat to survival sometimes. It's hard to be prejudiced when you're hungry and you're thirsty.
Yet they persevered, driven by a fierce determination to succeed. They formed their own communities, supporting each other through the hardships. They shared stories of struggle and triumph, passing down their legacy through generations. This brings us to the end of yet another video. Like, share, comment. We will be right back. Stay in touch. Thank you for watching.